area improvements. We are continuously improving. We've seen improvement in 7 out of the 8 tested areas for mathematics, and improvement in 6 out of 6 high school end of course exams. CPS ranks #1 in the achievement component, again, out of the Ohio Urban 8 districts. I'm going to continue to share about that. Our performance index was 62.8. We ranked #1 out of the Urban 8 in percentage of students proficient or better, and 50, it should be 16, it should be 16 out of 20 tested areas. And we ranked #2 in the Urban 8 in percentage of students proficient or better in 4 of the remaining 5 areas. Again, that's just a highlight of what we see with this year's report card. It was made final on Monday morning, and please, we know we have a lot of work to do. The administrative team, we are looking at identifying areas where we will grow and do better. On the first business meeting in October, you will hear our
questions. Say this, typically, committee of the whole meetings are all things academic. We kind of switch that around a little bit. So normally we look at academics, but I felt like it was unfair to give me just one day and really come up with a robust presentation for us. So I asked that be moved to Mondays. We'll get an extensive presentation around the data for the report card for the Monday meeting, giving them a little bit of opportunity to kind of go through everything and prepare a presentation for that lady. That was on me. And I don't want to know. I asked myself, then Monday we'll get a really good in-depth presentation. And I think board members have already been sent the link to the original data from ODE. I asked for that, and also our link to our data. So board members have the data that's for this state report card in your emails. If you not do your emails, you already have that simple question.
So let me start by saying thank you for providing us this update, as well as providing the report itself. And again, understanding we're going to have probably a little bit more depth conversation about specifics. I do think it is worthwhile to maybe ask if there are any indicators that you saw that are ones for which we would see an easy addressing point measure that might have an effect on what our report card ratings are in future years.
Yes, there's probably something I can say about each and every one of them, but I will call out a couple in particular. I will start with, there is a piece about our attendance where we either get points or we don't get points. This year we did not get points. I will not offer any excuses at this time. We can be doing better than that. Chronic absenteeism is an issue across our country, but we are putting together a working group to dig deep into. Okay, the second one, I have shared with the board just briefly some information about third grade reading in particular that we want to do and have some strategies we want to implement for next year. That is getting started. And so that whole K-3 literacy component, I think that we have some strategies to be able to improve in that area as well. I'll add a third, gap closing. It was disappointing for me because we really believed we were going to earn a half a star. I'll just be really transparent based on our raw data. And when the final data came out and we didn't get there, we were very surprised. Very surprised. So I think some work in gap closing in particular, which the board has pushed for home, and K-3 literacy and that attendance piece will help us do better.
And again, I appreciate you highlighting those three. I think the one thing for me that I think is also going to be helpful for us to think about. One, we'll have a discussion around year goals for the year as well. But two, as we're thinking about a new strategic plan, I think it's worthwhile for us also to recognize and appreciate the couple of schools who, you know, the question might be whether they are an outlier or whether it's some trend that we need to pay attention to for their changes. Because they have not historically gone down. It's stayed or gone up. And so I think that's just the other part for us as a board, as we talked about it on Monday, and going forward is, are there resources that either, is this an odd year in which we have the necessary resources in a school that will, you know, get us back on track and address those things? Or is this a trend that we need to pay attention to, that we need to be keeping an alert to? Because I did see some good numbers for some schools who had actually grown, and we had some schools that done really well, but I think there was also some schools that were where they had gone down in certain areas that you would not normally expect them to. And so I think it's worthwhile for us to keep that in mind as we talk about other discussions as a board.
Thank you. Vice President Bolden?
Yes, thank you. And I appreciate you with the kind of the quick overview today. And I appreciate President suggesting that we have a longer opportunity on Monday, largely to inform the public, because the public often only reads not beyond the headlines. And indeed, the story is richer and fuller beyond some of the headlines. I'd like to see on Monday actual comparison with our natural cohorts, which are the other 7 in the grade 8. I think that is very important. And as if I'll put on the Melanie Bates hat quickly, as she would say, our marketplace isn't really Cleveland or Columbus, but our marketplace is Hamilton County, and actually Butler and Claremont, if you think about it. So I think it would be important for us to have a good understanding of the school districts that are around here with whom we compete every day, to want to emphasize that. I also just internally do look forward to being able, as we've tried on finances, and transportation and what have you, this the idea of per school. We aren't in charge necessarily of the individual schools. That's everybody else's responsibility. But I think that would be important for us as we, believe it or not, start the next budget process. To Mr. Craig's point of view, the resources and where indeed to put the resources, and see where we were with some of our schools. And see, I also like to look at the categories of our schools. I want to see the K-8s do better than PK 6s or something. I think some more of that would be helpful to keep us thinking rather big, even though we'd be concentrating on individual schools. The last 2 things for public consumption, especially with the renewal coming up, I think it's great among the 8, as you just pointed out, to be ahead in early literacy. I think there's some emphasis, there can be some connection just in a messaging as we look at the renewal. And I think 2 things have to be defined for the public. And I say this all the time, the public does not understand the graduation or the attendance definitions. The way that the state frames it, it looks like we are failing in graduation, and that 80-some% is pretty remarkable and very good. So I would hope Monday night there would be some education taking place about what we really mean by graduation, and that just like last year, it was like we got an F, and and just anybody else's grade system or what have you, we would have been getting a B. And people understand that. And the other thing people don't understand, and this is the last thing I have to say, is they do not understand chronic absenteeism. That 40-some% or whatever, we need to define for the public what chronic absenteeism is. Because even when I've been having to do a radio interview, they assume that on every day, there's, only like 12 kids showing up, and that's not the case. That definition needs to be explained in the messaging on Monday night. I think that would be helpful to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lundy.
Thank you very much. Glad this will be a topic on Monday. Just two short things. One was a question. Superintendent, in Ohio, are there consequences attached to performance at a certain level on the report card?
Yes, so the state can agree to come and force school districts to do certain things. My understanding that is happening in some Ohio schools. It has not come our way at all.
What is the threshold?
I'll have to check on what that threshold is.
Okay,
Just
that would be
because there's
helpful.
nothing on my radar right now for CPS.
States really vary, as I understand it, in terms of whether and how they have consequences for various levels of performance. And it's changed, I think, even since I've been a
Yes.
board member. And so I think some update on what that is and how that works, I think could be really helpful
Okay.
for the public and for this board member. So thank you. I think the second thing is, from my perspective, the report card is really important, and it measures so much that I think that if we're going to lead effectively in our context, we're going to need to prioritize. It's one of the reasons I think it's such a good thing that we evolved the superintendent evaluation policy in the way that we did, so that it forces us as a board and the superintendent to focus within, there are how many data, there are many data points on the school report card. They all have value, but I think as a leader and as a board, we can't prioritize 50 things at once. And so I think even as we are having this very important conversation about the report card, which I think we should have, I think it's going to be equally important to say to each other and also to the public, given all of this, what are our priorities over the course of the next school year? And what is our plan to move that small number of priorities? I'll say from my part, if we set a small number of ambitious improvement goals for this school year and we hit them, and the report card doesn't change, I'll be a very supportive board member because we set our mind to something, we did it, it made a difference for children. Let's go set another set of goals. I think there's going to be, the system is so big, the report card is so big. I think it's going to be important for us to continue to set really clear priorities and stick to them. And I think there's such a good, naturally occurring opportunity to do this as we review performance from last year on the superintendent's evaluation in the October 6th meeting, and as we set targets for this current school year in the October 6th meeting. So I think this all works together, and I'm really looking forward to that discussion together. Thank you.
Thank you. Board Member Weinberg.
Thanks. So I'm going to not repeat some of the things that have already been said, but I do want to say that I do look forward to the deeper dive that we will take on Monday. One thing or one question that I will have for Monday or that I would expect to see is maybe discussing the plan in place for the schools that have either decreased and dropped in their particular points. Don't call me. Maybe seeing or hearing what is the plan for those schools, and then maybe what are some takeaways from the schools that actually increased and improved in their points. And it's always good to hear that we have made some growth, and for you to also be honest and say that we're not there yet and that we do have some ways to go, but it's about progress. And I'm looking forward to seeing that progress and then also hearing a little bit more of a deeper dive on Monday. So thank you.
My watch was calling you at one point. I apologize. Thank you. Board Member Mack, did you have something? Excuse me.
Yes, so thank you for presenting the data from the state report card, and thank you for your transparency about where we are. As it relates to the things that my colleagues have stated, as you are evaluating the processes that we can improve upon, if we could just add the lens of what does the staffing equity look like? So we're recognizing that there are schools that have decreased, having a part of that conversation. Are we putting our resources and our teachers that we, again, know that can really strengthen areas of growth for our students? Are we allocating those teachers in those respective spaces that are needed, as well as those administrators, because we do want to continue to see that progress occur? And in addition to that, in terms of just strategy, are we having that data literacy conversation, not just with our senior leadership, not just with the board, but also with our teachers regularly, so that they are also informed about how to continue that growth process? I do want to ask a question about the data, having an opportunity to take a deep dive. I know that we will go further on Monday, but looking at the 20 tested areas, I know that you said that we've increased 16 out of those 20 tested areas, and just looking at the data that you sent, not from what was presented, but the emails that you provided us with, I'm curious to know, I see 2 areas that have been maintained and 1 area of growth that would take us from that 13 to 14 tested or progress areas out of 20 versus the 16. Can you elaborate on how we got to the 16?
So working backwards, 3rd grade reading, 6th grade math. Let me see if I can, give me 1 second.
Okay, and I can call it out for you. I know it was, the areas of concern for me was the 5th grade science, where it was the 0.3%, and the American U.S. government, where it was the 0.3%. So in looking at this data, and again, I always claim that I am not a analyst when it comes to this. So, but when looking at this, this is reflecting that we've maintained progress in this area. Yes, very slight growth, but not of really significant relevance or statistical relevance in this area. And so, again, just trying to understand kind of the rationale behind how we arrived at this space.
So we looked at, the EMIS department and I sat and talked together after they flushed out the data. We looked at where we increased or where we decreased, and where there were decreases: 3rd grade English, 5th grade English, 5th grade math, 6th grade English.
Okay. So again, thinking statistically, I recognize the areas of decrease, and I want us to make sure that we lean into those areas. But again, in terms of narrating the data, and I don't know if my colleagues, they may have a different perspective about it, but in narrating the data, again, it reflects to me that we've maintained kind of like progress in this particular sector, the 2 that I called out. And again, very small growth, and I think that's something to definitely notate, that we're able to lean into this area to maybe drive more instruction, or we've seen a small uptick in this area, but I don't necessarily know that we would constitute it as growth. So just my own perspective. Again, I don't know if anyone else has had an opportunity to see it, but I'm looking at the tested subjects for the state test, and just the areas or the indicators where we made progress or where we declined. That's all that I have.
Thank you. I'm just making sure I get everybody. Mr. Crosser, thank you for coming. Did you have anything?
Sorry for being a little bit late tonight.
No, you're fine. I didn't want to skip you.
I'm happy to have the comments that have gone forward so far cover for the board.
Okay. I just didn't want to skip you. I have not had an opportunity in full transparency to kind of go through the data. I like data, so I'm going to do that. But so I'm going to look at those areas that you pointed out. I want to say, because I tend to be very critical, and I don't want that to come off to our teams that, oh, Dr. Moffitt's going to complain. I am so proud of where we are and the things that we've we are going to do better. So I want to make sure that I say that we've got people working really hard, and I appreciate it. But I am going to push better because our kids just deserve it. I, too, would like to see trend data. I want to see what's working, what's not working. If we did go down in an area, what changed? When I'm in the community, I entertain a lot of questions around very much what Vice President Bolton shared. People do not know that the 2 stars is at 85%. They do not understand that. They are just going by the narrative that they have had created for them. And when I ask the question, in what world is an 85 an F? They're just like, oh, wow, I never knew that. So in a lot of areas, we need to take this data off of the paper. And I don't deny that the report card is what it is. It is what it is. A 2.5 stars is exactly where we are. But yet, for me, that is one data point. That does not tell the entire story. So we need to take this off the paper for our community so that they understand where we are and what does that mean to say 16 out of 20. They're immediately going to make that a fraction, and if people were nervous about fractions, then all of a sudden they got anxiety, and that's not a good thing. But that number represents students. It represents achievement. It represents growth. It represents something. And when you look at things in totality, like as I explain it to people, like a soup, you can say, oh, this soup smells good. Well, it tastes good too, but you don't realize it's 3/4 cilantro, and it's 1/2 pepper, and just a little bit of varying each ingredient could change it. So we need to do the same thing and take that off the paper for our community. So what I would like to see on Monday is a little bit more of that explanation in the areas of where we met. What does that mean to the community? Maybe highlight some schools and say the schools that improved, major kudos, the schools that did not. What happened to those students or that community? Tell us a little bit about some of those areas that the community are going to look at a number and see, oh, wow, that's a 2 or that's a 1. But they may not realize that that particular community may have been displaced. I don't know, I'm just giving an example for the river, for the flooding. So they were displaced during testing, so that could have impacted it. So I just would like to see some of that data coming off the paper and then some trend data. What worked that we can replicate across the district, especially for those areas where we saw some gains. Is there a plan that you and your team have to replicate that at other schools? We heard a little bit about the tutoring, but there's a plan, I know. And so that's what I'm interested in those tangible things that you're seeing that can kind of take that data off the paper. Absenteeism is a huge concern across the nation, particularly in Ohio. But what are some of the things that we're seeing that we can ask the community to help us with? And with regard to absenteeism, what is it first and foremost? And they don't realize that. Just a couple of days a month are impacting that number. So for me, trend data, graduation explanation, and then the explanation of the data. And then I agree we should set clear, tangible performance goals, but we have to understand that ourselves. And I think we're looking too much at we're weighting very heavily the quantitative data of a numerical number from the state. And I'd like to take that off and explain that, yes, those are but one measure, and those are students behind that. So that's what I would invite you to do for me personally. And I'm going to look at the data too, because if you're not doing well in math, maybe that's part of the reason why we're not doing well in science. I don't know, but as a math teacher, we got to take it off. So the paper. Did Board Member Craig?
I just wanted to add in the fact that I think this year's numbers are also not necessarily going to be reflective of what next year's numbers are because of the substantial change that we did to the district. And so as we look at next year's numbers, I think it will be helpful for us to also think about whether or not those substantial changes has had an effect on how those classes are both taught and received and how the students achieve in those classes. I don't think that's something we'll necessarily need to talk about on Monday, but I wanted to bring it up because I did hear Vice President Bolton reference, the categories of schools, and I think that's The challenge this year is that those categories don't exist the same way they did last year. And so those numbers aren't necessarily going to be reflective in the future in the same way, but the individual grade test should still be somewhat reflective of the lessons that are being taught. And again, I think we've principally preached up here a lot to make sure that we're using the curriculum to the fullest of its, to its full level, and to make sure that the teachers are given the necessary resources to be able to fully use and teach this information. And so it'll be interesting to see long-term data, as we go through the rest of the year, whether or not the differences in how the district is now reorganized will have an effect on how some of those numbers are appearing as a measure.
I agree with Brandon Craig's comment. I think it's very important. The one thing that you might want to add in for Monday is if you were already anticipating certain schools or certain areas that were going to be underperforming, you may have already done some things to address those. And so maybe include that, not just look back, but maybe a look forward as well.
Vice President, okay, wait.
Yes, I
Okay.
want
You'll be
to
after her, I'm sorry.
react to what Member Craig mentioned about the categories that were for this particular report card are going to be different categories coming from this year, largely because of the ad hoc and growth plan. I'm encouraged to think that I think we saw some good numbers earlier in the year where indeed Schroeder was broken into two different buildings. I'd also like to Mr. Lindy's point about the consequences. I don't know any consequences regarding academics, but we do know financially there are major consequences if we fail financially. That's almost overnight. Things can happen to us. I'd like to ask us to think about something that I think the Accelerate Great Schools shared, this has got to be 7 or 8 years ago now, about quality seats. And us providing an opportunity for an expansion of whatever they defined as quality seats. We don't need to go back, but I think that's also part of what we have to do. We have to create environments and enrollments that allow for higher assessment. I don't think it's about performance. I think it's about assessment. And I think I'd just like to get that theme in there about quality seats as we look at school by school. I think that's important for our kids. Thanks.
Board Member Matt.
Yes, just an inquiry. So just looking at the overall rating, and I know that we increased in the college career workforce military readiness category. What would have been needed to maybe see that overall rating of 3? Would there have been maybe one more category added on, or what would have been required of us to reach that benchmark?
In the overall category, my apologies, there's a span of numbers that equates to you land at 2.5. So how close we got to getting to that 3rd star, we were really, really close. I can get you that exact number. I don't have it right now because really prior to Monday, I had a different number in my mind. So any growth in any of those categories would have been helpful to us. Getting all of the points for attendance, because that is all or nothing, would have been helpful to us. So there's a plethora of ways that we could have done it. And senior leadership is digging into all of those components, and we're creating ways to help our principals understand better, to the point made earlier, and the teachers, the components, what it looks like, sounds like, feels like.
Okay, perfect. And so the example of attendance that you just, used, that would have been indicative of that gap closing piece possibly?
So the gap closing is about whether or not, the gap closing isn't about the attendance necessarily. That's a separate aspect within the gap closing. So it's not the only component. Because we did earn points in gap closing. But if we had gotten points for the attendance, I think we could have gotten there.
Okay.
It's-
So, yeah, so I think to President Moffitt's point, I think really explaining a little bit further.
Yes.
So I have a clear understanding of what these categories entail, and we do know that the gap closing is seeing that reduction with our students, whether Black, Hispanic,
Yes.
multiracial. So I understand that, but I thought also in that category, there's that maybe conversations about chronic absenteeism or things of that sort. So is that something separate outside of the categories that we're seeing here? What is it, maybe 6 of them?
Yeah,
Or-
so it's not spelled out in those categories, but it is a part of the overall measure where you can get points. What we were hoping to do over the course of 2 board meetings is Monday's meeting, give you all of these definitions and the terms and provide the overall high-level understanding that you're asking about. What the senior leadership, all of the superintendents, what we are working on is, what are we going to do about this data? And we have just about all of our plan finalized. And some of it does include exactly what you're asking. What did we learn from other schools? Like, for example, the 9th grade algebra pilot we did this year, we learned a lot because we made a nice gain in mathematics. And so we're applying those learnings to some of the areas where we did not do what we wanted to do. The 3rd grade area where we saw schools make progress and growth, we are taking those learnings and applying them in other places and with other schools that didn't necessarily make that progress. So you are asking to hear the strategies and what we're going to do about it. And what I'm asking is if it's okay to keep it broken out, give you the high level, help everyone understand what the report card is calling for us to do. And then the following board meeting, that October, I think it's the 5th, give you what our instructional plan is for the year, which includes the written taught tested curriculum, what we're going to do about it, some of the things that you have already asked us to do in terms of curriculum implementation and where we are, if that's acceptable.
Sounds good, thank you.
Okay.
Is that, everybody good? Well, now you got a little bit more direction.
Yeah, thank you.
You're
Thank you.
welcome. You're very welcome. All right, let's see. Superintendent Murphy, please introduce our next
Yeah,
presentation.
so all of this works together. So previous Cal meeting, 2 meetings ago, we gave an overview of where we are with our goals and guardrails. And we talked about some of those had sunset, some of those we met the goals, and some we had not, and some we had another year on, and we asked your feedback. The last meeting, your recommendation to us was, hey, as Mike Turner is coming, come back with a set of goals that we think we could cover for this current 25-26 school year. So what you're going to see today is that shell. Some of the areas, we have the X to Y if you approve the goal as a whole, SMART goal. Others, we don't quite have the X to Y, i.e. graduation, because that's not finalized until October, and we need a little bit more time, but we still know we want a graduation goal. So Mike is going to give you the information in terms of where we are after the last 2 meetings, directions that you set for us. Mike Turner.
Good afternoon, everyone. So as Superintendent Murphy said, if we could have the first slide, this is in response to recent conversations. Completely understand you cannot take action here tonight, but being able to present to you some possibilities. As Superintendent Murphy said, Goal 6 are not necessarily for the cohort, because we are already a year behind with graduation because the way the report card does, we've had this conversation about goal 4. So when we get to that, we have split that into 2 goals. And that means that graduation would now be goal 6. And then at the end, just because of the conversations around a new strategic plan, just one idea of what that could look like in an accelerated model to develop a strategic plan on a fast track that could begin at the beginning of next school year. So the first slide, and these will go pretty quickly through, is all around a 3rd grade reading. So Superintendent Murphy met with the team. We know that we ended up at 55.7%. That number is now public at the end of last school year, which we're calling June in the goal. And the proposal is to increase that to 61% by June at the end of this school year. Again, this is a 1-year goal, very targeted with this year's 3rd graders. Goal number 2 talks about the gap, and based on conversations, again, with you, we have kept all of the subgroups together. Again, we can do the behind the scenes and digging deep into the subgroups. We finished with a 41.1% gap between white students and then Black, Hispanic, and multiracial students on 6th grade reading. That is a true gap. It is not an average of the 3 subgroups together. It's truly taken into account the numerators and denominators and the sizes of those subgroups. Remember, this is a reduction gap because it is reducing. So that number we are proposing at 38.1%. So go from 41.1% to 38.1% by the end of this school year for this year's 6th graders. Goal 3 is first-time Algebra 1 test takers. And again, these are true first-time Algebra 1 test takers. That is what the report card data is reported on. We ended up at 47.1%, and our proposal is to increase that to 52%. And again, that would be for this year's first-time Algebra 1 test takers. So goal 4 is one that we have talked with you about in a couple different ways. The way that the goal has been written, just jumping back to a previous board meeting, part of the issue with this in the strategic plan is, again, being transparent. We are not sure in the strategic plan where the X number came from because the interim goals definitely are written differently than the strategic plan goal. The strategic plan goal, if you remember, talked about the percent of Black, Hispanic, and multiracial students graduating with college credit plus or workforce credentials. Again, previous administration set that number, and we are just simply, truthfully, not sure where the X number came from. And so we definitely know that if we're going to target, we need to split this goal out. We have taken into account the recent conversations. We know that really looking at earning credit in College Credit Plus is what the goal's intention was, but the interim goals were based on students being enrolled in College Credit Plus, not earning credit. Workforce credentials, so if we could go to goal number 5. Workforce credentials, the interims have been calculated for the last couple of years on students in career tech courses, but the goal actually speaks to earning workforce credentials, but nowhere in the strategic plan does it really call out what does that mean. Is it 1 point, 4 points, 6 points, 12 points? So again, we're adding specificity and asking for goal 4 and goal 5 to now exist so that those are split out and very drilled down and targeted. This is why there are no X's and Y's filled in, because we want to make sure we have board agreement to move forward with that.
Mr. Turner, I have a question for you.
Yes.
I don't want to get too far down the rabbit hole without
Yes.
posing my question, and you may very well answer it later. But I want to understand what you just said. Can you go back one slide? You said, or I heard you say, and I want to clarify, that the previous goal was about attendance and it was about participation rather than completion?
Yeah, so there's two facets to that. And thanks for asking for clarification on that. So the way the strategic plan goal was written, it talked about earning college credit plus credit and a workforce credential, but that was never defined in the strategic plan of how much credit for college credit plus, what grade, which we had conversations around. But for workforce credentials, it just said earn a workforce credential. So what does that mean? The interims, however, were written in such a way that those were based on participation in college credit plus courses and participation in career tech courses. And those were not just confined to students who were seniors. That reporting data included any student in college credit plus and any student in a career tech course. Really not a good connector from the interim to the actual strategic plan goal. This is very targeted on actually earning college credit plus credit and earning a workforce credential of 12 points or more.
Okay, maybe we'll talk about it, because I'm
Sure.
still a little confused, because I thought that it was inferred that it's all towards employment enlisting or the 3 E's. So although it may not have been specified, we need you to have workforce credentials, it should have been inferred to be able to be employed. So are you saying that we as a board need to add a little bit more specificity to our goals so that it says what the intention is around workforce credentials and around college credit plus? Because college, they're two different things, but
Correct.
credentialing with regard to career tech is specifically to be able to become gainfully employed. So I'm just wondering, do we need to work on the wording, or where is there a loss in translation of being able to be
Sure.
employed?
So just Mike Turner's opinion, and had a few conversations with others around this. I think that the new report card indicator that we got a 3 on, the college career workforce military readiness, could lend itself to a strategic plan goal maybe around that indicator, because certainly workforce credential feeds into that, college credit plus feeds into that, but so does being college ready on the ACT or the SAT, also enlisting in the military. So I think the new strategic plan could lend itself to somehow connecting in a better way. Just to drill down, I really believe that the disconnect with goal 4 from the strategic plan point of view was not necessarily the goal, it was the way that the interims were written to work towards that goal, because being in a college credit plus class does not necessarily mean that you're a senior who's going to graduate, which is the way the goal was written. Also, being in a career tech course does not lend itself to the workforce credential. And there are students earning workforce credentials who are not in career tech. So there is that disconnect. So I do believe there needs to be more specificity with that, no matter how it's written in the new strategic plan, but the new indicator didn't exist when the strategic plan was written. And I think that gives a world of methodology to use in the new one.
Okay, thank you. I'm
Sure.
sorry to interrupt you.
So goal 6, Superintendent Murphy really talked about. Right now, this one is written at where we ended up with, but remember, we're always a year in arrears, so 86.1% is not the class that just graduated. We do not have the final data on that, but this is just an example. If we're looking at how to truly impact graduation, this one is written from 2025 to 2027. But again, this is a placeholder until we have the actual true data for the class of 2025. So then the final slide is just a draft, just an idea because of the conversations that came out of past meetings. And looking at the trajectory that the current strategic plan followed, a what if with some of the requests that have been made to look at, could we have this new one start next year? I won't go through all of this, but it does show a pretty aggressive model to get to that. But when looking at this, I think we all have to celebrate the fact that the current strategic plan is extremely thorough, definitely had a lot of stakeholder input. So the shell and the model is there. It's using that to adjust and adapt. And some of the strategic plan goals, I mean, it may be the desire of the board and committee for them not to change, but some of them may need some revision. And so that is just an idea of what that could look like. And that was it.
Okay, good. Board members, questions? But Vice President Bolt.
Yes, so just several comments. Where does science and social studies fit in this plan?
Science and social studies in the current strategic plan really fit under graduation. Superintendent Murphy may have another way to answer that, but there is a pretty big absence in the strategic
Yes.
plan of science and social
Yes,
studies.
and when we start emphasizing social studies and science, all other things will improve greatly. And it's nobody's fault, but I've sat here now for 18 years talking about science and social studies because we are so focused, rightfully so, on the report card and on the basic, rudimentary, critical skill sets that our kids need and don't necessarily walk in the school building with, where in other districts they do. I got it. But I really would hope, I would think, as you even look at some of these scores in the high school grades, right now on this one, high school is helping our report card out pretty well this year. But I would hope that there would be some emphasis on both the social studies and the science in some way, shape, or form. But just as a representative of the public, as a retired teacher, I'm totally into weeds. I can't help it. It's all fascinating. It's good. You can do that. You can fix this or whatever. No, the public is expecting us to have a 3. And that's what we have to have next year. And we came close this year. And all of this is a sham anyway, based upon weighting and the arithmetic that goes into all of this. But they expect us to have a 3 because allegedly that means we've met state standards as a district. It's great that within our district we have any number of schools that are doing that. And people can choose those schools if that's where they are. As long as we're providing quality seats. But they also expect our children to be able to read, and they expect us to have high graduation, and they expect our kids to be ready to have a meaningful, productive life after high school. I mean, that's where the public is. We, as educators and people really into this, know that there's ways to get to all of that, and it's all this specific stuff that we're doing. But we have to keep in mind that those things that the public demand us to do. And I think we made great strides regarding that preparation and readiness. I think that's a huge thing. They also expect, after any number of years of this being said, they expect us to be the highest achieving urban school district in the state. Those are expectations that the public have. And I think in many of these instances, we have met that, even with this 2.5 as a star. But let's keep in mind what the taxpayers and what the families and the parents and the children, I think, and teenagers are expecting. But, and then what Eve is expecting is to see more social studies and science.
Board Member Craig.
So I am going to try and avoid my soapbox moment here, but I want to do some clarification on goal 4 and 5. Just for the record here is a history point that I think I actually already said once at the last time we had this discussion, but the reason we set the goal for having a workforce credential, which were the industry-related seals that were required for graduation or for CCP credit, is because we did not have substantial numbers of folks who were graduating with both or either or. And the seals were new from when at least when we got on the board, at least when I got on the board, there were a new process that were added in. And as such, we were just now getting folks getting through that process. I think what we have realized, and I think that's why the interim goals were for folks to go and enroll in the classes and enroll in the programs. Because the only way you get the credit, in large part, the only ways for us to monitor whether or not you get the credit is for you to have the classes that you completed and the programs you completed. I am perfectly fine with us putting out the 2 goals now that we see that we can do both. I have no problem with that. But I think it is also not necessarily accurate to say that the interim goals did not match up to what the actual goal was, because we do it for everything else. In order to look at 3rd grade reading, we looked at what you do in 1st grade and 2nd grade as interim goals. In order to look for algebra, we looked at what you did in 6th grade and 5th grade in math to see whether or not you're going to be ready for algebra. And so that tells us you're on track to when you then take the algebra test, you'll be ready with that skill set. And so I think we're doing us a disservice in saying we didn't have a rationale or logic to how you connect the 2. I think now where we are is at a point where we are saying that the workforce credential standard from the state is, at least for what we are doing for right now, what we are measuring for this year, but for future years is not enough. And if we're talking about being the best, and we're talking about being the #1 public school district in Ohio, then we should not be aiming for the floor for a goal. And so I think that's something we can talk about for future goals. But I think it's just been, we've pushed the floor up to now where we are doing this, we're meeting in certain parts, we've achieved certain things with regards to the state level. There's more that needs to be done. I think it is also recognizably and important to also stress that as we go forward in deciding what our goals will be, it is still important for us to pick a smaller number, not a larger number. And I say that because it's hard enough for this board to talk about 4 to 5 goals and 5 to 6 guardrails that in a reasonable amount of time. And if we're talking about now having 10 or 11 goals, I just don't find that we're going to be effectively able to both guide the superintendent on where our expectations are, but also hold anyone accountable, because we're going to be looking at so many different things that are so many different factors that are involved in it in so many different ways. So I think as we decide what those goals will be, it would behoove us to pick a number that is a reasonably lower number to be the focus for us as a board, as to measure whether or not we're seeing growth. For the work of the students and for the achievement of students in the classroom, all of that's important. Every bit of it's important. Every bit of their students' education is important. And I think that's something the superintendent will always have in her mind each day as she's out there making sure that students are learning. But for us to be able to say, this is where we see the district needs to grow. This is where we see the district needs to really put a focus or an attention into. I thought that was one of the reasons that Algebra 1 was such an important one to put before from my end of the deal, because it is both a requirement for graduation and is a measure of something that almost every career program requires you to be able to do. Almost every tech school program requires you to be able to do algebra. And so if you can't do that, you cannot get into many of these programs post-graduation that you need. So I think the 6 goals for now, for this year, seem reasonable. I think us getting a number as to what that number would be for each of for 4 and 5 seems very reasonable. 6 is always a delayed indicator, so we recognize that when we made it a goal, because we always understood that you were basically measuring the class before the class, right? And so it's a continuous growth, and that should be the mark that we look for, and I think all of those are reasonable. And I just would maybe ask for us as we go forward, the only other concern I have with us setting the goals, the way the timeline stretches in there, is I don't know that it leaves a lot of time for engagement and communication with the public around these goals, and that we spend a good amount of time doing that. And I do think it's worthwhile for us to be able to do some level of, here's what we accomplished, here's where we were seeing the next direction to go. And so I might even suggest that even if it is that we come up with a few goals at this point, to do a larger strategic plan, maybe suggesting doing like another year of goals for 2006, 2007, as we build the bigger strategic plan that goes maybe 3 to 5 years, right? Because that way, then at least we would have something that's more substantive to both communicate to the public that we did and accomplished, and tell them where we want to go. And I worry that we won't be able to really do that from January to July, as we also are doing the budget, as we are also doing all these other things that we are tasked to do and communicate to the public with. So that's the only thing I would say, is maybe having a bifurcated timeline, or either having a timeline that extends beyond just that July deadline, but maybe thinking about having a 1 year that we set and a 3 to 5 year from that the public has their voice in and really implements, or really allows us to implement going forward.
Thank you. Board Member Lindy?
Yeah, thanks so much. I think this is a great and really important conversation, and I'm grateful for how quickly the administration has moved with suggesting something. We talked about this not that long ago, so I just appreciate the speed with which things are moving. For my part, in order for me to vote in favor of, this is, I think, high level good. I think there are 3 things that some of them may be present in here. At least some of them look like they're not yet, but I think they are, eminently addressable. But for me to vote in favor of a strategic planning process, there are 3 things I would want to make sure are really explicit in here. The first is that it start with listening. The first bullet says that the board and administration set priorities. I think it's really important that we do some proactive, strategic listening to the community, that we do that from every zip code CPS serves. If this is going to be 3 years worth of work, I think it has, so much has changed in the last couple of years, but I think it has to start with a clear strategic approach to gathering front-end community input. I think it's thing 1. Thing 2, this is what might be in here just based on the timing, but I can't quite tell. It has to involve costing out the full cost of the strategic plan with a revenue plan. So however we're going to move from X to Y, what do we need to invest in to do that? Why do we think that's the right kinds of things? How much does it cost? Factoring in every other source of cost inputs we have, got a great new treasurer. And what's that cost? I can guarantee you that the revenue we will have will not pay for it. So part of this ought to be, what's the levy strategy? And the time to do that is when we are writing the plan. So that if we are going to the public to ask for something, this is part of an integrated strategy that is part from jump. So in past iterations of these conversations, I can remember various leaders saying things like, well, we have these goals, but we don't really have a plan for how we're going to pay for it yet. I don't want to do that. I want that to be part of the process we're doing from jump. And then third, for me to support a strategic planning process, it has to involve the question, who in the country is best at doing the things that we want to do here, and what can we learn in the strategies that we are applying? I think like a bad version of a process is we try to come up with all of this on our own. A good version is we want to improve in 3rd grade reading. Great. Who is making the fastest improvement in 3rd grade reading across the country? What can we learn from them? How is that part of the plan? So I think this timeline looks great. I'm excited to do it. I think we should do it. For me to support it, I think it's got to start with listening. It's got to have the financing, including the revenue strategy, as a part of the process. And it's got to involve learning from who is best at the things that we want to be able to do here. Thanks.
Thank you. Board Member Crossett?
Yeah, I think for goal number 4 and 5, I think it would be worth to see the trend data. I think that would be helpful in trying to set those goals, including the trend data results of the interim goals, because there could very well be a correlation between enrollment and what gets earned. So I think that would be helpful information rather than just having X and Y. Let's just see what the history's been. I think on the strategic plan, I want to echo Ben's point, or Board Member Lindy's point about cost. I think not only do we want to look maybe nationally or wherever what works, but also within the district. If there's a specific school or group of teachers that are excelling, that might be a place to look, and not just what to learn from what they're doing, but what it costs. Thank you.
Anybody else? Vice President Bolton, you have your thing off. Are you wanting to say something?
I'm sorry, no.
Okay, this from me, my only suggestion is, I thought the community engagement piece should begin, it could probably begin in the fall around ideating with the community what their values are. Again, it didn't have to start necessarily in January, but I did think that it needed to include a little bit more community engagement. So I would like for us to capitalize on timing of what we're promoting with the community around our levy, getting them included, and that's why I thought earlier in the fall might be helpful. But I do think that, I'm going to say this again, it is time for us to reimagine education and what does that look like. And that is not, to Board Member Lindy's point, that's not something singular that CPS is having to do in a silo. Across the nation, people are having to look at, are these things working? And so we probably will find some other best practices that we may be able to expand on and create with. So I'd love some trend data and some other data around programming. What are other districts doing around absenteeism? What is it other districts are doing to generate revenue? What are some things that we can be doing to not only build for workforce development, but increase the seals, increase the exposure for our students? Like maybe we let our students cater some culinary events and they get paid, I don't know, I'm just thinking out the box. But again, I want to invite the administration to think creatively as we roll out a strategic plan that is going to be long-term into a 22nd century that our kids are going to be going into. It needs to be more creative. It cannot be what we've always done, because the students now are not the same. The parents now are not the same. So while we have the opportunity, let's dream big and see what else is out there. So those are the only things that I would add. Board Member Matt.
Yeah, so I do want to just echo with what all of you have shared as colleagues. I'm just, and also really emphasizing the point of listening to the community, whether it's from the parents, whether it's from different employers. I just recently had the opportunity to connect with several leaders in industry work, whether it is from the banks, whether it is from cybersecurity, and these are the conversations that they are having when they are talking about employment. They want to be able to have employees that have those 22nd century skills, right? And so making sure that our students are equipped and prepared to not only earn the seal, but to be able to step into employment confidently. And one of the employers talked about having little lag time in between that onboarding phase, being able to show up to the place of employment in a position of hitting the ground running. Granted, yes, there'll have to be some onboarding, of course, but being able to confidently step into that role. And so making sure that our focus is on truly educating our students, again, not from the floor, right, but exceeding and surpassing that floor, and so having those high expectations. I do want to add to some of the things that Board Member Lindy talked about as we're talking about looking at this plan. I would just add making sure that we have a formal evaluative process to thoroughly and regularly and consistently check how we are navigating the plan, right? So yes, as a board, we are monitoring, but again, that making sure that there's cohesion across every entity that looks at data. so that we can be singing or talking or speaking the same message, right? Even down to our students, I say that quite often, they are owners of the data as well. And then lastly, I do want to inquire about the goals that were set. I know for several of the targets, some of the annual targets are looking, the level of increase or decrease looks differently. So how do we make that determination on what the annual targets will be?
We had conversation around statistically the average of what we had been doing, and then what kind of movement you typically see in a goal, 3 to 5 percentage points. But we're open to your feedback based on what you believe to be best.
Okay, thank you for that. And then just, again, a clarifying question. I'm going back to this graduation, so help me process it. It's me trying to understand. So from the goal, Rob, could you put that last slide? Okay. So it's stating that the graduation will increase from 86.1%. So you're saying this is not actual data right now? Or because what I looked at the report from the state report card is saying our graduation is at 85.7. So I'm just trying to understand like the arrears, and so again, help me understand. I'm just trying to process it.
This button gets me every time. So keep in mind that graduation lags a year on the report card. So to give you an idea today, if we're looking at about where the class of 2025 may be, now keep in mind that's not what's on the report card, but that number's not final. Where could that grow looking over a 2-year period?
Okay.
But again, that's not final data because everything gets through October to clean up who your actual cohort is. But to give you something today just as what that could look like. Now, again, that covers a 2-year period. So that, because graduation isn't just, we're going to take them right now and suddenly, you know, they're going to graduate in like 6-7 months. But that very easily can change based on board direction. But that is not equivalent to what's on the report card because it's not the same group of kids.
Okay, but we will have a more definitive target in October once we get that final data. Okay.
Correct.
All right. Thank you.
Sure.
Vice President Bolton?
Yeah, real quickly, I just need a point of clarification. The goals that we're talking about now are goals for this coming year?
Yes, ma'am.
And we're also talking about a longer-term strategic plan. There's
Yes,
two
ma'am.
different things happening.
Yes, ma'am.
I would like, for clarification, I would like to hear the Monday or some other time, I want to know the difference between a strategic plan and an instructional plan. And that to the point that Mr. Lindy raised about the cost and what have you. I think there's a difference, but it might just be me making a difference as to what a strategic plan is versus the instructional plan. I think, very frankly, I've been here when we've had strategic plans and when we've had instructional plans. And I think that there should be a confluence for sure. But to me, they represent two different things. And I'm not sure if that's where everybody is, or that's just my understanding. So I'd like to hear some of the thoughts that the administration has regarding an instructional plan versus a strategic plan.
Okay, that's it? Board Member Lundy?
I was just interested if the board member has a perspective on the difference between a strategic plan and an instructional plan.
Yeah, first and foremost, it is your point about listening and the engagement piece. I'm not altogether sure the last strategic plan we had anywhere near the involvement or the engagement that the previous strategic plan had. And so I think that there's a difference. I think that listening is critical for a major strategic plan, but I'm not sure that the public's engagement is as critical on the instructional plan as it would be for a strategic plan. We want to know expectations, but they're not going to be in a position necessarily to help design an instructional plan, but they can design, I think, where they want the district to be in a few years or whatever it would be. I think, too, that an instructional plan really is part of what everybody has to be concentrated on, but the responsibility for it falls to particular segments of the district, whereas a strategic plan, everybody's got some kind of part to play. And so it's just, those are initial thoughts. Again, I'm still trying to figure out a way to talk about quality seats, or as you mentioned, consequences if you don't achieve, or what's being talked about. The last thing, the state very seriously is the consolidation of 600 and some school districts into about 60. That's actually getting some, that's not going to happen in the state. But it's interesting to be thinking about what can we do to make sure that we survive.
Thank you. Just two quick responses. I do not want my desire to learn about the requirements in Ohio to somehow become Board Member Lindy wants there to be lots of consequences for schools that score below, because that'll happen real quickly. And Board Member Lindy is suddenly going to be the one who wants to punish schools and punish teachers and punish principals. I want to understand the accountability regime that we have to operate within. That's on that point. I think on the different terms, I want us to have one thing. We can call it whatever we want to call it. But from my perspective, it's got to be something that all of our different stakeholders, that includes children and families, that includes staff, includes taxpayers, includes business leaders and business workers in the city of Cincinnati. Everybody can look at that plan and see, this is what CPS cares about. I understand why, and that looks right. Here's the ambitious but achievable goals they have set in those areas over this time period. They have an actual plan for how they're going to do it, including how much it's going to cost. And that plan is informed by the very best thinking that exists on the issues that matter most to this community. We need that. If we're going to ask the public for new money, we need that. If we don't have that, I'm not convinced yet that the public should give us new money. And now is the time to do it. And so I think what I don't want to have happen is we get bogged down in terminology. We need a vision that comes from what our stakeholders want, but that has real rigor behind it. And that's the piece that I'm advocating for. Thank you.
Got it. Board Member Craig.
And I'll try and be really brief here because I know we have some other important matters to address today. But I just wanted to also phrase out, and I think this may be something that we can talk about as a board as we think about the strategic goals. I think we sometimes have siloed out things like English and math as subject matters that have to be separate and not be a part of a comprehensive educational concept, right? So to maybe Vice President Bolton's point, in order for you to do civic education, you have to also be able to read and do reading comprehension, right? In order to do some of the business workforce development stuff, you got to do math and be able to work through figures and numbers. And I think there may be a way for us to formulate what are those goals that are not so much siloed to a specific, you have to pass this on the English, the third grade English part. But that may be, and maybe it is on certain aspects of it, but maybe it's measured out on some other things that are for the higher grades where we've already seen this growth, where we've already seen things that are expanding, or the opportunities in education is already growing, increasing. And so maybe what we are looking at is their ability to comprehend and then apply. And maybe that's through different comprehensive educational concepts as opposed to more siloed. Recognizing that that may be a challenge for us, and I think that's where we may need, that's where to Board Member Lindy and Board Member Mapp and President Moffitt's point, that's where the voice of the public can give us more guidance as to what they still feel we have not met. Because I think when we have those discussions around, again, like I think our students understand a lot of concepts very well and understand how to put, this concept in this one narrow space. They're going to be required to know how to do this concept in a space that's not that narrow space. And I think that's the area where I've seen us, at least the area where I think we are next moving towards is, it's no longer just reading to be able to read the words on the page. It's being able to take the words from the page, comprehend it, and then put it back out in a way that makes someone else know what you knew in that conversation point. And I think that's the part, I think, for our strategic goals, I would like us to be thinking about what are the next step up. Like our first set of goals were really about getting the bare levels at a certain point. And some of those we've met, some of them we haven't. What's the next thing we try to achieve to show that we are growing the student's education? And where I fear sometimes we stay at is we stay at the base level and we say like, okay, so third grade English, we got to get every kid to read third grade English level. That's great. And it's a great goal to have. The truth is they should be able to do more than just that. And that's the only thing I would say is I want us to start thinking, as we think about goals also, and as we communicate to the public, where do you want us to get to in 4 years and 5 years? That shows that we have grown farther than just we are getting more students to meet the minimum. Because I quite honestly believe we are going to have to show our merits to the public if we're going to ask for more dollars. And I don't know that we can do that by saying we're going to continue to do the same thing we've already done with the dollars you give us extra. And so that would be my only thought, is just as we think about a strategic goal, also thinking about how do we talk about it in a more innovative, comprehensive way that reflects more of what the education the students are getting. Because I do think there's a lot of great discussion and topics and talk in these classrooms, and at least from the experience that we just had last week, these students are learning so much more than we're giving them credit for and that we're able to talk about. And if we don't show some way to measure that or show some way to display that in our goals, we're probably not giving them the credit that they deserve also and how much they're achieving.
And I'll just add one last thing. I think I put on my sheet that I'd also like to have the students surveyed around what it is that they're looking for. We keep making these decisions about students and talking about innovative programming, but innovation to me is drones, but innovation to them might be gaming or, robotics. So I think we need to gather their perspective on what it is that they'd like to see. And I also would ask the questions around what will make them come to school, because there are specific reasons why some kids are not coming to schools. And if you ask them, they're unfortunately brutally honest, and they tell us. So that may give us some data around what programming to offer, but also how to address some of the ills that we're experiencing that we are impacting us at the state level, like chronic absenteeism. So as part of the engagement process, I think it should involve community stakeholders from the adult level, but I also think it should involve students. And there's a way to survey younger students, elementary students, on what it is that they want to see, and then we can take that. The other thing I wanted to add around Board Member Mapp's question about the targets, that is where trend data is super significant. If we are trending up 3 percentage points every single year, then to stretch us would be the justification for 5 percentage points. And so that should be able to be justified by data, how we're getting to the next level. I would hate for us to arbitrarily pick 5 as a measurement when we've not been doing that, or that seems unrealistic, but it should be substantiated in a quantitative measurement of what we can expect for the next level with a small bit of push. So that's kind of what I was asking for when I asked for that trend data, so that we can see how we should set those new target data points. Anyone else have anything else? Board Member Matt.
It's just a thought, and it's related to what Board Member Craig discussed. And so as we are thinking about the goals for the strategic plan, I do recognize how imperative it is to have that holistic and comprehensive approach to our students succeeding. But I am also truly in favor at the same time for our students to be able to excel in the expectations that the state have as well. And I know that our students are capable, our students are beyond intelligent and exceptional students. And so I do think that there needs to be more rigor around how we are educating our students and the expectations that we have for our students. And so, again, we do know that there are alternative pathways that are built in even from the state, but just reflecting on the trend data that we were able to see a board meeting ago, it's truly discouraging to see that we are not where we could be. And so I don't want us to necessarily deviate from finding or deviate from what the expectation is from the state, but finding an alternative path. We have those in place. Maybe we can assess a little bit differently, but again, I want us to really lean in and be aggressive on how we can meet those targets and those expectations that the state does have for us and our students. And then to Board Member Bolton's point about the strategic plan and the instructional plan, I think they work hand in hand. I think the strategic plan, to your point, is the big picture, right? And the instructional plan is going to be that layout, right, to say this is how we're going to meet those goals.
Okay. Anyone have anything else? Vice President Bolton?
Just a quick thought from Mr. Craig. The earliest part of what he was talking about, it was encouraging to me from a standpoint of not segmenting, not fragmenting, not concentrating on a particular test or a particular percentage or something, although we must do that in order to hold everyone accountable, including our students and ourselves. I keep thinking about the themes, and somebody mentioned literacy. That's a theme. This district will concentrate on literacy for our young people all the way through. A theme for me is quality seats, that we're going to make as many quality seats as possible so that great instruction can occur in an environment where they can succeed. But the biggest theme of all is I think Mr. Lindy mentioned, we want to be known for, is the theme that we've taken the risk to do, which is the DEI. And there's now in the polling, there is commitment by our public in favor of diverse learners having all the opportunities of everybody else. And I think there's themes that I think can influence both the instructional plan and the strategic plan. And I'm starting to think of it that way to help me figure out what's of interest to me and what I think might be interesting for us as a district. Thanks.
All right. Board Member Matt?
I just have a question for Board Member Bolton. Can you expound on the quality seats? Just expound on that for all of us, please.
Yeah, it's a term that I can remember. We were in the room, what used to be called 1A, when you first walk in the building, and we were having a committee of the whole. And as part of the committee of the whole, we had a presentation by Accelerate Great Schools, or whatever that was, and still exists today. There was and we reacted very negatively because they were kind of separating our schools into the quality seats versus not so quality, or whatever it was. It was crazy. But and they backed off, rightfully so. They didn't mean it quite like that. But the reality is we have to create schools and a district where learning is going to be happening. And it's going to be, it has to have the environment for learning. It has to have the resources for learning. So the quality seats, to me, represented what we as a board could do to make sure that every single school was an environment where you would have defined by other people, that's a quality seat. And I'm coming to grips with that terminology that's still back there like 8 years or so ago or more. And I think that speaks well to me about resources, about the purpose, the structure, the safety, the diverse learner. Everybody feels as though they're able to learn there. I know that's still nebulous.
Yeah, so totally understand it, and I just like really kind of the concept of all of our schools being
Exactly.
an environment for learning.
Exactly.
And so I can receive that. When we talk about quality seats, it can sound as though it's differentiating out, right? And so that's why I was asking just for you to clarify and expound on that a little
Yeah,
bit more.
and that was the reaction when that terminology was first presented, rightfully so. But when you really think about it, for me, it has evolved into this is possibilities. How can we make it possible that everybody's going to be able to learn to their capacity? What do we need to do? That's a quality seat. Everybody's sitting in a quality seat.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone have any other business? Thank you, Mr. Turner. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to dismiss you. I need a motion to recess into executive session to discuss the employment of a public official or employee in safety and security. Is there a second and a first?
So moved.
Second.
Treasurer Augustine, please call the roll.
Mr. Craig?
Yes.
Mr. Crossett?
Yes.
Mr. Lindy?
Yes.
Ms. Mapp?
Yes.
Mrs. Weinberg?
Yes.
Vice President Bolton?
Yes.
President Moffett?
Yes. We will not come back here. We will recess, and there is an LSDMC meeting tonight, so 6 o'clock. So looking forward to seeing everyone for that, and everybody have a good